Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 57, Where the Heart Lies. Since Subaru had left his life in the hands of fate, about 10 minutes had passed. Regulus, come on already. Strive after something for once, how about obediently dying here? Subaru, you are? Regulus kicked at the house, cutting into it with terrifying precision, and the building without its support toppled helplessly. The cloud of debris accompanying the collapse filled the vicinity, and Regulus, whose own vision would up-clouded, clicked his tongue impatiently listening to these tiny sounds. Subaru returned to the battlefield that had been exhausted of its traps. Regulus, restlessly moving about, do you have no notion of attacking straightforwardly at all? Although I couldn't care less about your relationship with that whore, but if you're claiming to be their knight or whatever, is this any way to fight? Subaru, say whatever you like, you talk until you're satisfied. Regulus, there you are. If Subaru had tried to refute Regulus's malicious mutterings, he'd receive in return a handful of sand that would end his life. The instant after Subaru had escaped far away, the debris that he'd been hiding behind vaporized. Being brushed would lead to fatal injury, a single strike would mean instant death. So far, Regulus's attacks had all miraculously missed. As contact would instantly mean the end, thanking fortune for this would be a tad inappropriate. Subaru, concentrate. 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 Catching his breath, wiping away sweat, he tensed all his attention to prepare for evasion. The rising dust stained his face, and Subaru spat out a mouthful of saliva that tasted of dirt. Putting the results of his parkour training into effect. Unlike the days when his exercise had been without goal, the clear sense of purpose of right now had an enormous impact on the state of Subaru's mind. In the forest near the new Roswell mansion, repeated every single day, to the point of being sick of it that time hadn't been for nothing. Subaru, no matter what, I'm just a guy who can at most mess around with the skill of an amateur. Even then, he was someone who had stopped a Sin Archbishop of the witch cult. Considering the battlefield situation and Subaru's personal ability, to say that he was accomplishing something special wouldn't be much of a stretch. If Pristella could safely escape from the witch cult's sinister hands, no matter what he'd try to contribute just a bit more. Subaru, so. Regulus, are you going to keep trying to kill time with this? Do you seriously think that someone like you could be of any threat to me? You're just someone who figured out greed's secret a bit, but don't mistake that for the ability to stand against me. Without even room to catch his breath, the enraged Regulus increased the scope of his destruction. Regulus no longer cared about how much collateral damage he'd cause in order to kill Subaru. The Pristella, which was famed for its beautiful scenery, was gradually losing those sights from the crimes of the witch cult. The stone bridge that spanned the waterway was shattered, the store meticulously decorated with glass was destroyed. Finding a feeling odd beauty in the flashing of shivering glass that was dissonant from the scene, Subaru believed in his right foot, and took the momentum of destruction as a cue to flee. Ironically, from his right foot came a surge of power. Pitch black, infected with who knows what, that right foot was currently Subaru's lifeline. Lashing out with his whip, latching onto the rain gutter of the horizontally oriented buildings. Believing in the tension of his whip, Subaru stomped hard on the ground, crossing the streets as if running along the wall, passing by Regulus's side as if to specifically force the evildoer to watch him with widened eyes. He stuck out his tongue for extra provocation. Regulus, you have no idea just what you're worth. The stone thrown from his swinging arm flew far off, completely missing Subaru, who fled using the momentum of yanking his whip. Without even considering an attack, using solely the tactics of escape. Those who had perished at greed's hands had died due to their excessive courage. Weak, fragile, and timidly insisting on escaping. Certainly, such a person could not lose. Thus, that misfortune could be wiped clean here. For that goal. Subaru, is it still not ready yet, Emilia? This guy's heart. Emilia, someone with a clue, isn't there anyone? Before the brides who had promised their aid, Emilia accepted the mystery of possibilities and bit her lip. The 53 assembled brides all glanced back and forth at each other at Emilia's question, before finally shaking their heads weakly. Sylphie, my most sincere apologies. Casting that man's control aside and wanting to help you is certainly genuine. Only. Bowing her head with remorse, this was the representative of the wives, the blonde woman named Sylphie. Amongst all of Regulus's wives, she was the one who was most well informed about their current situation, and so she'd become a representative of sorts. Sylphie, I can scarcely believe that that man would play something so important with us. Though that man may call us wives and brides and whatnot, but actually acting as if we're husband and wife has never once happened. Emilia, although I've been told of Regulus being a super problematic person, that shouldn't be the case. Regulus's lion's heart is definitely placed on you. Although Sylphie had begun to feel discouraged due to the lack of clues, Emilia would not be so easily disheartened. At long last, Sylphie and the other wives, of their own will, had found their resolve to escape from Regulus's grasp. This was only the beginning of their resolve. To become discouraged at this very first step was absolutely unallowable. And as for Emilia, she believed in Subaru with nary a trace of doubt. Subaru was amazing. Not only was he aware of so many things Emilia didn't know, but he could apply knowledge and a lively attitude to a solution, no matter what adversity they'd had to face in the past. And so, Emilia held no misgivings about his suspicion that Regulus's authority was Lion's Heart. This was not to say that she was acting thoughtlessly or with blind trust. Just because it's Subaru, it's okay, was not the case. Even Subaru would make mistakes, and on occasion he would fail. However, that mistake would be corrected. Or she'd take his hand and become a force that could help him. This had become a source of Emilia's trust in him. Emilia, Subaru thinks that Lion's Heart must reside within the wives. Touching her chin as if lost in thought, Emilia remembered the secret of greed's power that Subaru had shared with her. An authority that could stop the time of an object, that could leave it unable to be changed. Although she'd initially thought such a power inconceivable, she found that too much fell in place with that explanation. Could this truly exist in reality? Rather than being in uncertainty, it would be better to say that. Emilia, there, a super inconceivable power is at work. Apparently, this was something even more irrational than a divine protection. Unfortunately, Emilia, lacking a divine protection herself, could not comprehend the power inherent to those who were blessed with divine protections. However, in Regulus, she could sense something similar. Something far more ferocious and ugly than a divine protection were these authorities. Emilia, heart. To Emilia, the worst-case scenario would be if one of the wives were truly a confidant, connected to Regulus's true heart. This real bride would then be siding with Regulus, and would be concealing her heart from Emilia. Emilia. Leaving the contemplative Emilia aside, the brides congregated around Sylphie, scrutinizing their previous conversations for clues. Emilia's amethyst eyes carefully scrutinized their faces as they engaged in a serious discourse. At the same time, she directed the microspirits to look for changes in their bodies. These microspirits weren't particularly sensitive to changes in people, so their behavior, as if to test those who had applied for cooperation, was decidedly unpleasant. However, her misgivings had long exceeded the level that I don't want to doubt could curb. Spirits, MMM. The microspirits gave a response. Although it could not be said to be certain, the wives had given no obvious reaction. Within the sphere that Emilia could observe, there were clearly no wives who served as Regulus's confidant. In that case, the only other possibility that came to mind was Emilia? Suddenly feeling as if her hair were being tugged on, Emilia immediately raised her head. Before her eyes, dancing in Emilia's line of sight, was a microspirit glowing blue. The microspirit that should have been tracking one of the brides swayed in the air, as if wanting to convey something to Emilia. Her eyes tracing the spirit's line of travel, she found that it now faced Sylphie. She too was currently working hard, as the lead singer of the chorus of the wives revolt against Regulus. The microspirit was fluttering around her back, as if bobbing up and down. Emilia, hey, do you have a moment to talk? At Emilia's greeting, with an expression of surprise, Sylphie turned. Emilia walked over to Sylphie, sneaking a glance at the microspirit, which emphasized its presence near her chest. Sylphie, what is it? Emilia, excuse me for a second. No one present beside Emilia could see the microspirits without physical form. So no matter how hard microspirits tried to communicate, they could reach no one but Emilia. So, when Emilia suddenly reached a hand out toward Sylphie's chest, Sylphie looked back to Emilia as if shocked. Sylphie, eh? Hey? Emilia, wait a moment, please stay quiet. I'm checking something right now. Sylphie, what are you checking? Hey, what are you checking? Her cheeks reddening, Sylphie questioned Emilia without being able to mask her surprise. Emilia then answered Sylphie with a serious expression. Emilia, the rhythm of your heart. Sylphie. Emilia, it's because I'm a spiritualist. Though my original contracted partner is currently on leave, I can still communicate with the microspirits. I asked those microspirits to investigate your bodies, and received a response that only your heartbeat was strange. Sylphie, my heart. Sylphie swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Her expression was entirely one of disbelieving surprise. Her shock was merely a matter of course. After all, she'd only just heard a brief summary of Lion's Heart, before being told that her heartbeat had changed. And if things had progressed to this point, there was only one explanation. Emilia, too much. Regulus combines his heart, together with the heart of someone who he claims to be his wife. Regulus, no matter how you look at it, although you're wearing the image of virtuousness while reciting your respectable rhetoric, where the notion that your battle to buy time would actually bear fruit came from, is a complete mystery to me. And although I don't know how you could conceive of my power, but now having clearly understood it, you would really want to keep fighting? As he glanced down at the bloodied Subaru, Regulus seemed to tilt his face upward in boast of his victory. Collapsed on the ground, lying by the side of a building as he took pained breaths, half of Subaru's face was stained with fresh blood. Subaru, go. Regulus, although I've let you run about here and there, you're really boring after having fallen. Well, that's to be expected. It couldn't be not like that. Considering the difference between you and I, this is nearly reaping the crop when the harvest is over. With this, at last, without extraneous unpleasant moods, the end has come. Approaching the collapsed Subaru, Regulus's heels crushed the rocks littering his path. His authority was still active, as if he wanted it to be witnessed. Regulus, in summary, don't you feel that this is the fault of your excessively arrogant self? Up until now, there have been many like you, who wanted to beat me down or rouse a battle against me. But of all those people, not a single one has ever touched me. That is the fate of those whose desires supersede their abilities, an absolute law of nature. Do you understand? The Sin Archbishop of Greed, discussing the nature of desire, asserted his contempt for those who allowed excessive desire to immolate themselves. To have desire would create struggle without meaning. To have desire would create starvation without boundary. To have desire would create ruthlessness without limit. For this exact reason, to be without want and without desire was valuable. Just pray if you are poor, to have your own talent is optimal. Regulus, just being content with the present enough, craving what is beyond own abilities will lead your own destruction. Gathering together one after another but refusing to learn, you are really a bunch of hopeless creatures. With a sigh, Regulus slid a hand through his white hair, shaking his head as if he was drunk on the throes of a tragedy. However, the sorrow in that voice was no act. Regulus was more or less from the bottom of his heart sighing at the foolishness of Subaru and others who were not himself. That was the self-righteous, undetectably lonely voice of someone omnipotent. Subaru, before I die, your powers. Regulus, a last offering, as the saying goes? Trust you to know something archaic as that. You've bested me in an irrelevant store of knowledge, is that what you're trying to say? Regulus laughed as he watched Subaru, whose breaths looked on the verge of cutting off, wishing only for that last answer. Without a single route of escape, all that was left for his sorrowful existence was imminent death. Regulus, well, you've already gotten this far. At the very end, I'll give your negligible self a reward for your efforts. I'll tell you that this time you struggled to your very last to buy is all completely meaningless. Subaru, meaningless, you mean? Regulus, it's all really rather simple. My heart that you and that woman are searching for is indeed carried by my wives. But as to who is carrying it, neither I or any of them know. Equal rights, equally divided love, and the responsibilities and obligations they bear are equal as well. Toward the astonished Subaru, Regulus shrugged with a well, it's sort of like this? Regulus, for those who have taken multiple wives, treating all of them equally is a matter of course. In addition to a few clever justifications, only those who practice equality are allowed to exercise their authority. In other words, I'm betting on my life. Constantly, I am manifesting my love for them. Subaru, and the wives are unaware of this heart's condition because? Regulus, not like it's a particularly complicated reason. Constantly hearing the sound of one's own heartbeat every day, there isn't anyone out there who would continue to pay it any mind, is there? Watching Regulus, who laughed with his mouth open, Subaru understood. The method with which Regulus hit his heart, that vicious method. Both simple and effective, and more defensive than any other method. Subaru, with your heart and your wives' hearts, you. Regulus, managing the husband's property is indeed one of the wife's obligations. But you see, since I am a man without desire. In the first place, I don't have the amount of meaningless possessions that guys like you do. And so, what is entrusted to my wives is my existence itself. What magnificence, isn't this the very essence of matrimonial love? Disgusting. Regulus's consciously ruthless authority. Without malice, without condemnation, he believed that was the natural order and process. Subaru had come up with a number of theories on Lion's Heart as hidden methods before sending Amelia to the church. But no matter how he looked at it, this had not been one of them. Moreover, if no one could break Subaru, something so far beyond reason. Amelia, she couldn't possibly do anything. Just now, if what Regulus had boasted of with a face full of pride was in fact the entirety of Lion's Heart, then there should still be a method of breaking through it. If that could be conveyed to Amelia with her power, she could take care of it with haste. The question was not one of possibility, but one of correctness. That is, the choice of life and death. Regulus, Hey, you. As he rose with a disgusted expression, Regulus wore an uncomprehending gaze as he watched the Subaru who stared at him. Being caught up in the demolition of the city, Subaru, who had until now seemed to be on the verge of death, brushed the dust from his knees as he stood, still glaring. After a moment, Subaru raised his eyebrows with an ah as he noticed Regulus's incredulousness. Subaru, playing dead? Ah, no. Playing the verge of death. Since a flying stone happened to slice my forehead, I just wanted to give it a try is all. Applying blood to his face and pretending to be in agony had led to now. With a face full of smiles, Subaru looked at Regulus, who had been toyed into the palm of his hand. Subaru, I trusted in you. You're definitely the kind who, if you found a dying enemy, would arrogantly boast of your victory as you rambled on nonstop. Regulus. Subaru, whoa. Rising with a jump, Regulus's body flew forward in a straight line. With incredibly agile speed and movements of a dirty casual, he flew in a straight line. In this rare moment, Regulus could achieve an acceleration that could shock even Reinhardt. However, without being able to see that mechanism, his understanding of it was limited. Subaru, foe. Accelerating with his right foot, without hesitation his body flew toward the left. Regulus's goal was to slam directly into Subaru, but he was thwarted by the limitation of linearity. In summary, the Regulus's momentary superhuman ability was the result of an application of freezing his physical form. The time of his body was cut off from the world and would not be interfered with again, was that man's power. If he were to attack suddenly in this way, whether gravity, air resistance, or inertia, none could restrain him. It wasn't always in effect, which should be because there were restrictions. Regulus, go you bastard. Subaru, the one who wants to yell is me. I have to find a way to reach Emilia. The position Regulus's heart absolutely needed to be communicated. To communicate it, and to make choices. What method was there? In order to save the city, Emilia was needed. Subaru, Emilia. In contrast to Regulus, who gathered momentum, Subaru looked in the direction of the church where Emilia should be. In the midst of the ruined, collapsed street, a street that could not be crossed in Regulus's aftermath, was a half-destroyed church. And that place in the next moment was engulfed in a brilliance that shone blue and white. The hearts of the wives became one with Regulus's heart. Emilia's conclusions caused tremors in all the surrounding wives who heard it. Most heavily affected was Sylphie, who found herself the recipient of Regulus's shared heart. Sylphie, my heart, and... After her hand fell back, Sylphie's face stilled as she backed away step by step. The woman standing behind her worriedly placed her hand on Sylphie's back. Sylphie, do not touch me. In the next moment, Sylphie reflexively spoke as she swung out an arm. As if to keep the other wives away from her, holding this posture, she looked at Emilia. Sylphie, are you sure there's no mistake? Emilia, the microspirit says it's unnatural. I too can feel a faint sense of overlap in the sound of your heartbeat. Sylphie. Sylphie placed a hand on her chest, closing her eyes as if to confirm what Emilia had just said. The speed, strength, and interval of her heartbeat resounding in her throat, she gave a deep sigh. Sylphie, I see, just how much, just to what extent does he want to trample upon the souls of others, that man? Emilia, wait a moment, what are you doing? Revealing an incredibly dry smile, Sylphie walked into the depths of the church. Half destroyed from Reinhardt's attack, in a corner of the church were scattered shards from the skylight, of exquisitely carved glass. Sylphie plucked up a shard of glass and turned back. Sylphie, you understand, don't you, that man's schemes? Imposing his weaknesses unto others, and then forcing resolutions upon them as well. Emilia, resolutions, are you saying? Sylphie, in order to stop that man's heart, stopping my own heart is the only feasible way. As that man says, till death do us part, isn't this the case? As she played with the shard of glass, Sylphie spoke in a flippant voice. Emilia understood what she meant, and at the same time picked up on the underlying message. Sylphie's epiphany and Regulus's malice. Emilia, wait, you can't. There has to be something, has to be some other way. Sylphie, such a convenient way, do you truly believe it exists? With our hearts already joined, stopping just that man's heartbeat without stopping mine, couldn't possible be, and... Emilia, don't give up so easily. If I could allow something like this, for what have I? Why did I leave that forest? There was once again about to be a victim. Because of Emilia's lack of power and knowledge, a sacrifice was once again about to happen before her. Just like everyone in the forest. Just like Fortuna or Juice. As if to bury what Emilia's hands could not reach, everyone but Emilia were inclined to use their own lives. Sylphie, the days of being taken as that man's wife were truly arduous. Desperately, Emilia considered if there were any other way. During this time, Sylphie's heart gradually calmed down, and with the clarity of approaching the condign finale, she slowly began to grow more resolute. Sylphie, merely in order to avoid trigger that man's imperial wrath, I held the consciousness of death close. Allowing it to slide no matter how brutal that man was, welcoming the new brides, only for those children who were in the same position as me, no matter what, I wanted to protect them. Just as the one I first met, just as the ones before me protected them. Acting as the representative of the wives, presenting herself before all the others no matter what, and now her true meaning was clear. Before her had been others. Triggering Regulus's temper, someone who had stood at the forefront of all these seized women. And then Sylphie took that will up, because even now these wives remain still. Sylphie, even if our spirits were defiled by that man, because he would never touch our bodies. Certainly, if both had been defiled, we would have long been unable to withstand. So right until today, no matter the language or voice or behavior of that man, endlessly we endured and endured and endured and endured and endured, and yet. Having reached this point, Sylphie, who had been biting her lips, tilted her face upward. In her eyes were large drops of tears, as well as a scorching rage that seemed searing enough to evaporate even those tears. Sylphie, that man's hand has tainted even my body. I thought something like at least I could protect my body, but even something I wanted to protect that much had never been saved in the first place. Tears flowed as a roar from the soul tore itself from her, and Sylphie's hand wept blood. The glass that she had been gripping firmly had cut through the palm of her hand, and though she frowned at the pain, the corners of her mouth soon pitifully relaxed. Sylphie, because women bearing injuries are atypical, even the slightest of bruises would mean death by that man. This wound is my freedom. Emilia. Sylphie, in no way is this your fault. I am incredibly grateful to you. Toward that man, revenge for every single day unto now, a better way could certainly never be found elsewhere. With a slight smile at Emilia, Sylphie looked toward the other wives, looked toward those who could be called her companions. Then clutching the glass with her own two hands, she pressed it against her chest. Sylphie, if I die, his heart will be transferred to someone. This is a certainty. That man wouldn't use just myself alone as a shield for his heart. Just like that, everyone has no reason not to know that man's stubbornness. Surely, it will be so. Which one of the brides who whispered that softly was unknown? As if assenting to what Sylphie had said, the wife who had answered emerged from the crowd. A woman with long chestnut hair, she too took up one of the shards of glass scattered beneath Sylphie's feet. Wife, something like death, I too have considered it a number of times. Even if I'm living like this, I can't say that I'm truly alive. I'd rather reunite with my family in the afterlife. Wife, my reason for not doing so was not wanting to die. Even if I were to be liberated from this pain, I wouldn't have any happy memories from life. Wife, but if dying. If this life could bring vengeance on that man can to pass. If my death would be something without meaning. One after another, the wives came forth and took up shards of glass. The brides looked at those sharp edges, as if looking upon their hopes. With Emilia's words as an opportunity, the wives found their hopes, found something their lives could be spent on. Sylphie, thank you, we are truly grateful to you. That man, aside from us, he truly has no other wives present. This is something we can absolutely guarantee. So then, we'll trouble you for what comes after. Emilia. Sylphie, please be sure to help us speak. Our anger must absolutely reach that man. All we can do is trouble you, having been forced by that man, and then rejecting him successfully, there has only been you. Sylpy's request was said with a voice full of warmth. The wives all approached the shattered stained glass of the church that was to be witness to a marriage, holding the fragments in their hands as a symbol, chose their end. Pointing the sharp edges against their pale necks, with a breath they were to suicide. Emilia, wait a moment. That action of certain death was stopped by Emilia's words. Emilia, who had fallen into a silence until now. In her words were power. Both in physical and metaphorical meaning. Hands of ice reaching out from the ground sealed the wives' movements. The slashing movement was successfully hindered, successfully preventing their suicides. Sylphie watched Emilia's movement with wide eyes, and then spoke with a trembling voice. Sylphie, I beg you, please understand us. Your sentiments, I am truly grateful for. But any method other than this. Not but death could serve as repayment. Not but death could strike a blow against that man, against Regulus. That was Sylphie's, the wives', conclusion. Stopping their own hearts, this sorrowful answer, Emilia also understood. So to figure out how to deny it, thinking and thinking, all along she had been thinking of a way. And so. Emilia, I'm sorry. Not like this. Sylphie, Emilia, if it were Subaru, he might have thought of another way. But my head is a bit slow, so no matter how hard I thought, I didn't have a clue. So. Surrounding the muttering Emilia, brilliant lights of blue and white began to dance. Gaining mana, the swaying light, was the microspirits which had entered a visible state. As if to engulf the entire collapsed building, the substantial gathering of microspirits began to appear that was, in a sense, a sight as sacred as a dream, and Sylphie and the others held their breaths. Emilia, I want to make your heartbeat stop. Because if you stab your throats with a weapon like that, you won't die such easy deaths. After Emilia lifted her hand, the microspirits seemed to follow that movement as they shone, and a bluish snow began to fall in the church. The snow layered thinly around the brides, and where it brushed their skin, it turned into white crystal. This magic that Emilia was capable of was both the gentlest and cruelest. Emilia, sorry. I can only use this method. Sylphie, please don't apologize. After realizing Emilia's intentions, Sylphie breathed a sigh of relief. The sentiments of the wives was in alignment. They looked at Emilia, who was unable to form even a single sound, and spoke in unison. Wives, thank you. Emilia. Then, a brilliance that shone blue and white engulfed the church. Icicles rising as if an assault from the sky made a complete frozen seal around the church, forming a sound so sorrowful as if to roll over the sky, as if the sky itself had turned white and died. Within that structure of ice that had risen, how much sorrow had gathered. No one, save for the one who was responsible for this scene, could understand. Subaru. Emilia. The ice created by the incomparably powerful magical vortex was peerless beyond measure, and could not have been made by anyone but Emilia. Lion's heart truly had been subdued along with the lives of the gathered brides. His heartbeat had stopped. Subaru had already thought of the method. The only possible method. Then, that method would have been impossible to actualize. He'd even made an emotional preparation for Emilia's failure to reach the church. But, upon seeing this spectacle, the answer was clear. Chosen by Emilia, that answer. Regulus, hey, isn't this a bit? Looking in the same direction as Subaru was Regulus, who could imagine the result of this ice structure, and his cheeks began to twitch. The place where the icicles were raised were where his wives currently were. Regulus of course well understood. As well as what that spectacle meant. And so. Regulus, you too. Is this what you set out to do? Is this something that humans are capable of? Seizing another's beloved, arbitrarily without authorization. Just how cold-hearted can you be to do such a cruel thing? Regulus stomped at the ground as he shouted thus at the bloodied Subaru. His saws shattered the slate, and even distorted the earth enough to create an illusion that the city itself was shattering. Rushing forward without second thought, Regulus stabbed his fingers at Subaru. Regulus, satisfied? Are you satisfied? In order to kill me alone, you dared to snatch away the lives of all my faultless wives, and even felt happy to have done so. Your humanity. His mouth spewing dirty curses, the body of Regulus, who spoke of the sorrows of being plundered from, was suddenly sent flying. The reason for that was the spear of ice sent by the girl who had emerged from the church. The spear of ice struck Regulus with astonishing momentum, ceaselessly striking the body of the standing Regulus in succession. His body was sent flying like a doll, and in the process several more spears of ice flew at him. The momentum did not stop there, and like this Regulus's body was slammed straight into the waterway, and with a loud crack the waterway was frozen, becoming an ice sculpture in Regulus's form. Emilia, all that just now, consider it a divorce from your wives. Striding across the frosted streets, Emilia returned to the battlefield in a flash of silver. She stood on the collapsed street, looking at the approaching Subaru, whose pitiful sight made her narrow her amethyst eyes. Emilia, Subaru, those wounds. Subaru, I'm fine. It's just a scratch that bled a bit more. More importantly, the church, where are the wives? Emilia. Everyone wished to defeat Regulus. So. Averting her gaze, Emilia's attention drifted slightly back to the church. This reaction was enough to convey that Emilia's choice did not belong to her alone. And the weight of that choice, Subaru would not have to bear it as well. Subaru, but the effect of Lion's heart is interrupted. That man's invincibility trick should be at an end. Emilia, no. It doesn't seem to be something that'll be so easily solved. Subaru? The sacrifices made as a result of our choices should have been the price paid for the answer. Emilia shook her head slightly toward Subaru, who was thinking such thoughts. As he was astonished by her reaction, the ice filling the waterway behind them began to crack. The crack began to expand, affecting even the flow of the blocked-off waterways. The collapse spreading to where waterway met water flow. Subaru's souls were already immersed in overflowing water. Regulus, truly a laughably ridiculous arrogance, vulgarity that is incorrigible, incompetence that brings speechlessness, shamelessness that brings disbelief, inferiority that is hopeless. Leaving the canal, the murderer, who was drenched but not wet in the slightest, approached. His white suit unstained, his white hair unshaken by the wind, his white face free of wounds, without even a drop of sweat. This existence was practically a daydream, no, better to call it a nightmare that appeared midday. Regulus, and now, what will you do? You too, how do you plan to take responsibility? Though you droned on and on like you'd done something great, in the end this was nothing but a failed miscalculation, in the end there were only sacrifices. How do you plan to fix this situation? In the form of this Regulus, who was enraged to the point of madness, the effect of the unchanging lion's heart yet lingered. Emilia had made an assault on that level, forget being wounded, even a trace of what had happened could not be seen at all. Subaru, how's this possible? Even just now you were speaking of lion's heart, unending effects. Presence of mind to bluff in a situation like that, how could someone like you have it? Regulus, do you think me so kind that I'd turn a deaf ear to that which can't be ignored? I'll say this first, isn't the notion of not infringing on others' hearts basic etiquette? Clearly no one's looking down on the rights of others, so how is it that you two are always doing something so mentally deficient? Conscience aside, do you lack in even basic intelligence? Facing these unintentionally provocative lines from Subaru, Regulus looked down with an unimpressed expression, knocking against his head of white hair. Regulus, it seems that contemptuous prostitute's counting is wrong, isn't it? Not remembering the number of lives even though she's the one who stole them away, that's a killer's way of thinking. Certainly there's something wrong with it. Subaru, since when did you have the right to say those words? Regulus, don't surreptitiously try to change the topic. Anything I've done to date and such has absolutely nothing to do with that woman's ungratefulness. Don't turn your back on the sins you have committed. Don't look away. Tossing your own issues aside to blame the other party, don't you feel ashamed to call yourself a person? No matter where he went, carrying a vexing share of rage to impose on others was Regulus. Carrying not a single doubt about his way of life was the foundation of Regulus Corneas. How many contradictions would appear in his series of speeches before he was satisfied? Discourse with Regulus was truly damaging to sanity. Facing a sin archbishop of the witch cult seemed to create an illusion that normalcy was wrong. Regulus, but, look, you miscalculated. The substitutes for his heart, would even destroying all the alternatives of those be unable to lift Regulus's invincibility? There should have been no problem in theory. During his risky bet with his life, Regulus had proven that he was not so smart as to be able to calculate with skillful words the way Subaru could. Regulus did not have the ability to deceive or rely on his eloquence to mislead. He was completely unable to change his way of thought. In his world, there was no one but him. Marriage was merely imitation, speeches were merely ideological, battles were merely conducted as an outsider. His way of being was merely pure malice, almost exactly like a little king. Emilia, 53 people. Next to the trembling Subaru, Emilia muttered. She has not until now, toward Regulus's fallacies, curses, unspeakable complaints, shown no reaction whatsoever. Only one sentence, all she spoke was this one sentence. Regulus, ha. What? Just now, what did you say? Emilia, I said, 53 people. The number of women you forcibly brought to your side. Could it be that I'm wrong? That would be absolutely impossible. I could never miscount the number of lives. Regulus, millimeter. And? So what? What are you trying to say? With a contemptuous attitude, Regulus dismissed Emilia's quiet assertion. Digging a finger into his ear, an attitude full of ridicule. Even Subaru, with sarcasm as his strongest suit, wanted to clap in praise for his flippant manner. Just as Subaru was about to accept Regulus's provocation, Emilia looked straight toward him. Then she shook her head slightly at Subaru, who held his breath. Emilia, it's all right, Subaru. I understand it all now. Subaru, by understand, you mean? Emilia, and, because I am incredibly angry right now. No longer will I forgive him. Feeling fear squeeze his chest, Subaru saw it. On that gentle face, feeling quietly vanished, was Emilia with a soft sound. Freezing her feelings like that was the most furious Emilia that had been seen until now. A frigid flame rolling across frozen eyes in that manner, Emilia touched her chest. And then, spoke. Emilia, Regulus's heart is here. Right now, beating inside my chest. Chapter 58, Faith. Regulus, Khe. Placing a hand on his chest after Emilia had spoken. What rang out was a laugh that could not be hidden. Although what leaked out was at first only a breath, he soon could endure no more, and his voice gradually escalated in volume, until it became cachinnation. Regulus, ha ha ha. Ah ha ha. Hugh, ah ha 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 ha. Straightening his back, Regulus laughed loudly as if he'd heard a great joke. Sticking a hand into his white hair and tousling it, the murderer was now immersed in a fit of laughter that no one else could understand. Subaru could tell from his smug demeanor that Amelia's speculation was correct. Subaru, you bastard, what's so funny? Regulus, of course it's funny, isn't it? Or rather, you are. I really must suggest that, in this desperate situation, you should give up on trying to think and we can all laugh together. On that note, do you understand the current situation? You yourself, with your own hands, pushed the most critical of critical points into this calamity. Subaru, go. No words could be fitting. Only in this moment was Regulus's reply so perfectly reasoned that it could be met with naught but speechlessness. Subaru turned his head to look to Amelia, confirming with her whether or not her speculation could be proven. However, toward Subaru's searing gaze, Amelia shook her head. Amelia, there's no mistake. I had the micro-spirits confirm, and I can feel it myself. Inside me, there's something extraneous that doesn't belong to me. It feels so disgusting. Amelia asserted thus, a despairing hint that announced the present reality. The effective lion's heart had moved to Amelia. In other words, the only way to stop Regulus now would be to stop Amelia's heartbeat as well. Subaru, then again, why is Amelia's heart with Little King? Could it be that I made a mistake? The man's heart, no matter who, as long as he wants. If it were that kind of ability, there existed in Regulus's authority no loopholes. If he could give his heart to even hostiles and strangers, that would mean that as long as the human race lived on, a way to kill Regulus did not exist. Rather, if it could be that his heart could replace that of any living creature. Subaru, truly shameless. Regulus, the worthless howls of a retreating dog are pleasant to hear. Ha ha ha, no matter what I have to say. Just keep running with your temper, searching for some ridiculous excuse for your failure is the right of the loser. And enjoying superiority while hearing them is my right as the winner. Ah, this isn't bad. Not bad at all. Amelia, I don't meet your standards for a wife, you yourself were saying so earlier. Regulus, so annoying. Going on and on as if you're strong enough to speak of your own rights. More importantly, how are planning to take responsibility for killing my wives? My ideal wives. How long do you think it took to gather such a group? How many years do you think it takes? Obviously of age, but lacking anything like a wife or lover. Do you want me to be one of those garbage widowers who no one wants? Before I find a new wife, you have the obligation to join with me. Using stern words to smack at Amelia, full of spirit as he voiced his rhetoric was Regulus. The violent reasoning that the murderer believed in, completely convinced that his heart was indeed within Amelia. If so, the possibility of removing Regulus's heart from Amelia. Regulus, would you like to try? To see if there's a way you can move my heart? Regulus, the method is simple if you want to try it. Right now, just kill this girl before you. As long as you end her life, you'll naturally understand whether or not my authority will stop. Very, very simple, effective, and reasonable. Ahaha. You couldn't do it, could you? If you do something like that, with the motives and values that you've challenged me with, won't you have lost your self-justifying reasons? Although hard to admit, Regulus was right. Subaru had not the courage to sacrifice Amelia. Call him selfish, call him arrogant, only that could he not do. In order to defeat Regulus, they had already tossed aside the lives of his wives. Even with the revelation that there had been no alternatives than letting go those sacrifices, in no way could they compare with the life of Amelia or his other comrades. Natsuki Subaru's choices always were selfish to a disgusting degree. Regulus, you see. Someone like him could never. In that case, how about offing yourself in proxy? Simple, isn't it? Just like what you did to the others. Or what? Can't you do it? Though you've clearly taken the lives of others without consent, but because you treasure your own so much you can't do it? How amazing, I think I'm going to vomit. Amelia, Subaru. Subaru, wait, you can't. Seriously, this alone is unacceptable. At Regulus's provocation, Amelia too seemed to be calling to Subaru as if in realization. Hearing the unsparing tone of her voice, Subaru hurriedly stopped Amelia in fear. Even if you giving in to the provocation, surely she wouldn't immediately make the choice to abandon herself. However, Amelia had already done a good job of choosing the worst option if she didn't have the means to win. Then Subaru had only the thought that he would absolutely not choose this path. In that case, they had lost. Calling Amelia's name had only stopped her, but he could speak no words. Regulus, then, in that case we're about ready to draw this to a close, aren't we? Although keeping a low-grade woman like you isn't in my interest, for time being I'll compromise. Before finding my next wife I'll join with you for a bit. Though I'll just have to kill this guy. You've already infringed on my rights to this point. Ah, that's right. So, did you laugh earlier? Before Subaru, who clenched his teeth, Regulus happily turned the corners of his mouth upward. A torrent of magic was welled around Amelia, as she planned to make her own decision. At the same time, Regulus, not taking note of the wind, laughed. Regulus, you're that guy, aren't you? That loud voice in the city that yammered on right before my wedding? Killing a single sin archbishop or whatever, what a joke, right? My condolences if you really thought you could best me just because you killed that disgrace. That man, both before and after becoming an archbishop, has never accomplished anything, he has always been a simpleton. Regulus, standing and giggling. What his words pointed to was without doubt the madman Betelgeuse Romani Conti, who Subaru found abhorrent. Betelgeuse was the worst kind of lunatic with no redeeming qualities. He felt not a shred of goodwill for the lunatic, instead hating him down to his bone marrow, and would never spare him even were he to come back as a ghost. But nevertheless, seeing the sin archbishop ridicule Betelgeuse, who was supposed to be his comrade, in Subaru's heart grew an inherent feeling of unpleasantness. The possibility of defeating Regulus, and in addition this entangled state of Amelia's life and death didn't even need mention. Then again, Betelgeuse Subaru, should have been a loathed lunatic opponent, mad bloodstained laughter appearing in his mind. While thinking back, he lifted his face. Then something felt as if it had begun to stir within his chest, he seized it, swallowing his breath. Could it be that something like that was also possible? Subaru, could it be done? Incomprehensible. Strictly speaking, no one can guarantee the possibility generated within Subaru's mind. Just like bringing an empty table to a negotiation, or rather, it was closer to being the product of Subaru's delusions. Merely Subaru's own feelings. But that was precisely why, able to arrive at this possibility was only Subaru alone. That notion now, based just on intuition, even a god wouldn't know if it could succeed, but Subaru, Amelia. Feeling the magic that seemed to have risen to its limit, Subaru called to her. Amelia remained silent, only revealing the realization of a tragedy. Nevertheless, deep in her eyes a hint of emotion flashed through. That was, expectation and trust in Subaru, who watched her. As if to lend support to those feelings, Subaru asked. Subaru, Amelia. Subaru, can you completely trust me and leave everything to me? Amelia, I can. Toward this question, her response came simply and without hesitation. Amelia placed a hand on her chest, and for the first time since returning to the battlefield, revealed a smile. Amelia, I believe that if it's Subaru, you can do anything. Ah, damn it, how despicable this was. A girl who he liked, treating him with unflinching trust, how could he fail? Whether holding tight with hands or biting tight with teeth, he wasn't allowed to fail here. Subaru slowly breathed deep, then slowly released the breath. Then, glanced toward Regulus, who watched them in silence. Regulus did not obstruct their conversation, just rested on his wrists as he waited leisurely. Subaru, aren't you a bit too relaxed? Regulus, aren't I usually relaxed? Any trace of failure and the like, not even a speck remained. Regulus had revealed all his preparations, and wanted to do away with Subaru. In truth, Regulus's authority, Lion's heart, was perfect. After clarifying its key points, victory was still placed somewhere nigh unreachable. However, precisely because he was convinced of his impending victory, would when confronted with Subaru's struggles and efforts, watch from aside without intervention. He had no idea what was happening. That point was the same for Subaru himself. Subaru. If Beatrice had been here, there might have been another method. If that intelligent girl had been by his side, there would have certainly been a less risky way to win. In the depths of his chest lay the connection with the girl who was his comrade. Certainly, after all this was over, he'd be in for a scolding from her. Not being scolded wouldn't do. So now that he was alone, recalling the times when he'd been alone, the memories remaining within his chest were certainly not ones which brought happiness, awakening only an initial landscape of terror and agony. Amelia, Subaru. Amelia, let go and do it. Amelia's call became strength for him to make the decision. Subaru violently seized his own chest, rousing something within him that was truly difficult to consider his, concentrating his consciousness on the center of the whirlpool where this chaotic force swirled, liberating it. In this moment, slightly changing the manner in which he called it. In order to have the murderer who had insulted the lunatic understand what had happened, only this once. This power inherited from that abhorrent madman. Subaru, come forth. Unseen hand. Invisible providence. Or rather, unseen hand. The force that surged through his body, Subaru defined as the power of the witch created by the witch factor. He'd heard from Echidna in her dream castle that he'd gained the witch factor since he'd killed Betelgeuse. What detriments it had were yet unclear. However, the power which gave Subaru unseen hand undoubtedly came from here. So until now, Subaru had never sought to use the witch factor as his own source of power. Subaru firmly believed so. The nature of this power being similar to that of the madman's was because the witch factor of sloth inherently held this nature. The possibility of Betelgeuse running amok within him, he didn't even want to consider. But if this is the case, what was this feeling about? Echoing, lively, silently cheering from inside Subaru. Cheering for being called upon. Cheering for once again being able to use his power. Cheering for being requisitioned, completing his goal. And then, was only an unspeakable, incomprehensible joy. Accompanying the liberation of that power, that happiness and appreciation, as well as that feeling of gratitude. The fluctuation of this incomprehensible emotion was in no way something Subaru's problems could solve. Regulus, ha! Accompanying Subaru's loud scream was Regulus's own cry as he looked to the sky. He shouldn't be able to see it. Because this was unseen hand. The poisonous hand that was perfect for assassinations due to its invisibility having been insulted by Regulus's sluggish, a negligible and residual power, something even weaker and more residual than that. Only one in number with an incredibly short range and too many unknown factors. As the key to breaking through this situation, there should be a limit to unreliability. Subaru. The first step of summoning the magical hand had been passed. Starting now were the unknown second step and the third step that would be the final one. With his own consciousness, Subaru commanded the fingertips to take action, infusing his own hopes into the magical hand that seemed woven by shadow. Subaru, Emilia. And once again, confirming whether or not she was aware. Seeking help for herself. Along with that sound, Emilia closed her eyes, nodding as if she understood what would happen after this. Emilia, it's fine. You are here, Juice. Emilia's eyes were filled with warmth and understanding as she spread her arms. Repeatedly preparing for Subaru's intention, as if already having seen what would happen, she shortened the distance to her heart. Subaru did not hesitate as he brought the magical hand into her chest. The invisible hand moved to the center Emilia's chest. As the fingertips passed through her white skin without resistance, Emilia's shoulders jumped as if she'd felt something. However, the hand could not stop. Through the sternum, across the lungs, finally reaching the pulsating core. The magical hand had arrived at Emilia's heart. The second step had been accomplished. When the taboo was triggered, the witch's magical hand easily passes through Subaru's body and only hurts his heart. This was an application of that principle. Unseen hand and the witch's magical hand sharing that properly was the only path left to gamble on. However, the gambling had been successful so far. The problem was that after this, there was no precedent for that power. If he were to just seize Emilia's heart, he could do so in an instant. But that would make no sense. This power was not to be used for that. So, what was this power for? Right now, in this moment, this power would be used to save. Is this really possible? Subaru, with his mind in a sea of confusion, took a deep breath. Unseen hand, could it really be used as a hand which saved? Under the madman named Betelgeuse Romanicanti, how many lives had this power stolen? Although that would depend on the power's use, oftentimes powers were limited in ability. Was unseen hand the type of power that could bring naught but destruction? This power, no matter if existed for the sake of having someone live on, no matter what. Emilia, Subaru. Hesitating and doubting in that moment, Emilia's voice, which he shouldn't have been hearing, reached him. Emilia, it'll be fine. Because I have faith in the both of you. Who and what was she talking about? Emilia sent her trust to Subaru and another person he didn't know. But with ease, he accepted and believed all of it. This hand absolutely would not hurt Emilia. Subaru, come, my third hand. Within his heart, the undispellable doubts about this power dissipated. How this power had originated didn't matter anymore. This power right now was in Subaru's hands, and Subaru had no intent of hurting Emilia, and if anything existed within power itself. In Emilia's chest, the magical hand weaved by shadow began to close. Fingertips touched Emilia's heart, which was engraved with rhythm, and Emilia gave a slight gasp at the gentle grip on the surface of her heart. Rather than pain, it was akin to a slight itch. Inside the chest Emilia whose were dyed red, the magical hand that closed its fingers to seize an actual heart. And that heartbeat different from Emilia's own, that little lion's heart. Subaru caught you. He did not have room to pull it out. With his magical hand, Subaru crushed the heart that shamelessly still beat within Emilia. Emilia's heart received not the slightest bit of damage, merely defeating parasitic organ that yet sang odes to love. Subaru truly did feel sensation from that third hand that did not exist. And then Subaru, foi, at the same time experienced the cost of using such a degree of concentration on a power which did not belong to him. Organs feeling a pain as if being carved, rushing forth was a sense of despair, as if he'd been tainted. Subaru immediately fell upon the ground with both knees. Harsh coughs that were even tinged with blood racked him. Amelia, Subaru. Amelia reached out a hand toward Subaru, who knelt on the submerged ground with blood leaking from the corners of his mouth. He took her outstretched hand and placed it on his face. Amelia, Subaru, still alive, right? Amelia. I'm fine. My heart is perfectly fine, still beating inside me. Subaru used the touch of the hand which yet flowed through with blood to reassure himself of reality, and Amelia used her empty hand to confirm her heartbeat. There was no doubt in this moment, inscribed there was heartbeat that seemed congratulate the happenings of right now. And then only Regulus alone wore an expression, as if he couldn't comprehend what was happening as he looked upon the two. Regulus, What happened? Casting aside those around you, for something only those involved with you can understand? What is this repulsive scene? Just what happened, you? Subaru. You didn't notice? Regulus, What are you talking about? Haven't noticed or whatever. When not a single change has. Subaru, your feet, they're getting wet. Regulus? Subaru pointed to tell Regulus, who seemed to have succumbed to his anger. Regulus was shocked to see his feet growing wet and fell momentarily silent, widening his eyes. Noticed the reality that his white tuxedo, white shoes and hem of his clothing, were soaked through by the water by his feet. Regulus, you people actually. Noticing this change with a response too slow, Regulus bared his teeth and waved his arm. But a slender white leg struck out, kicking into Regulus's face and sending him flying. Completely unprepared for this direct hit, Regulus gave a wail as he was kicked to the submerged ground filled with water. Half his body was left soaked by the water, and a shoe print remained on the side of his face that had been kicked. Regulus, this kind of. As if unable to comprehend this reality in the slightest, Regulus blankly lifted his face. Looking down at such a Regulus, Amelia, who had performed the beautiful kick, tilted her head slightly. Amelia, I did it. I finally landed a hit. Regulus, you. From Amelia's short sentence being filled with a sense of accomplishment, Regulus's face grew red and agitated. Using the motion of standing to gather water, Regulus scattered droplets of water at Amelia. However, the pain of taking the kick had his victorious figuring collapse, and the bomb of water flew in a completely wrong direction, instead leaving him wide open. Amelia, ice brand arts. Regulus, hook. Creating a hammer of ice in her hands, Amelia then slammed it directly into the center of Regulus's body. Receiving a swing that threatened to crush his bones into, the body of the murderer did rolls in the water. With unsuppressed coughs, slamming his fist into the ground without pause, Regulus glared at them with reddened eyes. Regulus, why? Why? You people, it just had to be you, what did you and why did you to greed? And to my rights. Subaru, to someone like you who saw all the proceedings and yet still hasn't figured it out, it'd be useless to explain it to you. Well, that's how it is. Very simple. As he pitted the screaming Regulus, Subaru endured internal cries of agony from his organs, revealing a sneer. Revealing a ferocious smile that would not lose to even Betelgeuse. Subaru, you were played by your opponents because you ridiculed them so much. Regulus. Even if he didn't quite understand the meaning of those words, the taunting intent would be clearly conveyed. Regulus screeched with a sound that couldn't even be called a sound, ignoring Amelia's stance to launch himself at Subaru. However, he was cut off by Amelia. Amelia, earlier, the attack I made in the stead of your wives because it didn't seem to work, allow me to land one that does. Regulus, stop kidding around. Appearing over Regulus's head hung countless icicles. Each one varied in size, but if they all fell together, they would bring instant death. Amelia's disgust of Regulus had reached a point that even her gentle self could not stand. Climbing to his feet with a leap, Regulus struck at the falling icicles with water. Though the icicles shattered, the small shards still had their uses. Ceaselessly tossing out bullets of water, as if in a storm, Regulus cursed loudly as he was bathed by ice and rain that he ran through. The snow-white crystals of ice turned to fog, and froze in the streets that had been submerged in water. For Subaru too, the water along his knees formed a film of ice around him, scaring him into hurriedly pulling his hands out of the water. Even with consideration for Subaru, such a rain of destruction had befallen him. Of course, Regulus, who was the actual target at hand, was simply no match for this. But Subaru. Completely unhurt? In the frozen scene after the barrage of ice had ended, Regulus remained, standing and alive. Knees supporting his arms, spitting out uneven breaths, even though his entire body was soaked through with water, he still avoided a final puncture from an icicle. Regulus, absolutely, absolutely, ha. Regulus, who clutched at his chest looking as if he were dying. Look at that demeanor, Subaru, understand. The invincibility from Lion's heart could still be used even with the heart from his own body. Only, Subaru, if you stop time to become invincible, it will cause the heart in your body also to stop beating. Is this the still perfect invincibility with a time limit? Regulus, go. It seemed he had struck true, as Regulus endured the pain in his chest to show his rage. If there were a time limit, sooner or later Emilia could land an effective attack. In that case, Regulus was but a random soldier who had put his everything into attack. Regulus, that's, don't you feel despicable in the slightest? Regulus pointed a fingers at Subaru, who was analyzing his opponent's strength. Additionally, he pointed toward Emilia's direction, looking back and forth between the two of them. Regulus, two people gang up on one person, in an act that's essentially extortion, do your consciences not ache? Isn't there something wrong with your most essentially human part? Do you truly hold no doubts about yourselves who are capable of this? Having doubts should be what's right, shouldn't it? Subaru. You're really something else. This was in fact the same mouth that had, under the advantage of Lion's heart, spoken non-stop, having now lost that effect and falling into a disadvantage, dared to use the disadvantage to ask his opponents for justification. Subaru had already completely exceeded surprise, to the verge of now wanting to respect him. Such an existence without a shred of human dignity would perhaps never been seen again from antiquity unto now, from now on to the hereafter. Subaru, that is to say, your belief is this? Because the 2-on-1 is too despicable, you hope to be able to fight an upright 1-on-1 battle. That's in fact the way battles should be. Is this the case? Regulus, exactly. Would that be doing the proper thing the proper way? Who do you take me? Who do you think I am? Iasin, Archbishop of the witch cult, Regulus Corneas, who is charged with greed. This world's most satisfied, most resolute existence. Regulus spoke thus in a trembling voice, as he looked down at his hands. Subaru was now completely speechless. So in Subaru's stead, Emilia spoke. Emilia, going back on your word immediately after saying something, the contents of your speech is entirely devoid of actual meaning. I think you are the most pitiful person in the world. Regulus, hook. Truly irritating. Greed will definitely make you regret this. Even shallow in his rage at the contempt of others, Regulus repetitively, endlessly repeated the drone of his curses. Looking at the helpless demeanor, Subaru could finally feel fully relieved. Regulus was genuinely unable to win in any situation where he did not have the highest advantage. If he could use Lion's heart for even a brief time, he still had a chance at victory. Clearly this was the case, but upon seeing a little bit of difficulty, he would immediately give up without even bothering to glance across the setting. Subaru, scorning progress in life, will lead you to fall down in unexpected places. Regulus, ha. Subaru, nothing, talking to myself. More importantly, we can accept your challenge of ship-to-ship combat. Regulus. That's more like it. This is how it should be. Of course, a knight would not let their master step up first. As long as it was in line with his mood, Regulus would immediately attach the conditions that gave him an advantage. Between Subaru and Emilia, their level of combat needed no comparison. As long as he first killed Subaru and caused Emilia to waver, he could see hope in his odds of victory. Straining that mind of his that did not exist in the first place, that conniving result seemed to suit Regulus's tastes perfectly. However, if he wanted to best Subaru in terms of unrelenting perseverance, he was hundreds of thousands of years too soon. Finding a chance to win in a situation where victory was impossible, this was Subaru's truest way of fighting. Looking in terms of determining victory or loss, the match between Regulus and Subaru had already begun. Subaru, indeed, having a night battle is the righteous way. Regulus, in that case. Subaru, so now that it's come to this again, I'll leave the rest to you. His feet still submerged in water, Subaru said so after exhaling deeply. At those words, Regulus tilted his head with a ha. However, Subaru's words were meant not for him, but for him. Ah, I see. The one-on-one duel you proposed, I accepted as a knight. Responding was a flame. In these flooded streets, a young man who sent not a single ripple as he strode across the water approached. Unlike the inexplicable mystery that Regulus, he was possessed of protections that had been bestowed by the love of the heavens. Reinhardt, of the kingdom of Lugunica's guardian knights, from the line of sword saints, Reinhardt van Istria. Standing before Subaru and Emilia, the knight who reported his name pointed at Regulus with a sheathed sword. That demeanor of denomination was an invitation to begin a one-on-one duel. That was something even Gut Hunter, Elsa would respond to, the well-established declaration of a duel. In contrast, Regulus stood, stretching his hands before him. Regulus, wait. This isn't normal. Defiling the sacred duel, the very definition of a warrior, the sword saint, will not show him any trace of tolerance. The opening blow started below Regulus's underarm, vertically slashing across his body. Regulus had not even the chance to cry out before being slammed far into the sky. Regulus, hook. Before his eyes was the demolished city of water. He was suspended so high in the sky that he had a panoramic view of the entire city. Whether a cry or a curse, a sound incomprehensible to all who heard it, echoed. Chapters 57 through 58, Where the Heart Lies.